and welcome to a Schoolhouse for Art conversation. I'm Lana. I'm delighted to be chatting today with Dave West. Dave is a regular tutor at the Schoolhouse for Art, but he is also one of the nicest fellas I've met. He is a very humble artist, but his work is absolutely incredible. He's born in Wales. He is renowned and well known in all of the Irish and British societies and institutions of art. He is represented in several galleries. If you haven't seen any of Dave's work, let me find out what the names of these galleries are, because his work is well worth going to check out. So he's in the Doorway Gallery in Dublin, the Lahinch Art Gallery in Clare, Kilkenny Art Gallery, Killarney Art Gallery and Novell Art Gallery in Clifton. You can check out more of Dave's work on davewest.ie, and I am hoping to get Dave online now and we can have a chat with him, and he'll be very... There he is.
Hi, Lana.
Hi, Dave. It was smooth. That was totally smooth.
Wasn't it? I was ready. Yeah. I was ready.
You were ready. Yeah, I've to laugh that I asked you a few minutes ago when we were chatting before this live on if you have anything coming up. And while I was on your website, you have a solo show you're preparing for. Did you know that?
I did know that. Yes.
And it's not secret because it's on your website, so I'm not giving anything away.
No, it's not secret at all. Yes, I do. I have a show coming up in June with the Doorway Gallery. So yeah, I had one last year. It went really well, really successful. So they asked me to do another one this year. It's nearly all landscape based. So it's stuff, that I've been working on the last year. I love a project. I love something to work towards. Kind of focuses my energy. So yeah, I've sort of been going around the country. There's some of the west of Ireland. There's a few pieces of from Venice and Holland that I've been painting in a little bit.
Wow.
I'm going back there this spring as well to both places, and some around Dublin as well. So some local pieces.
You're a dab hand at Plein Air, for sure. That seems to be one of your passions, or you get a lot of your muse is working outdoors.
Yeah, I love to work outdoors. Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it was a natural progression for me. I painted it landscape. I suppose I've been predominantly I'm a landscape painter. It's what I love. Every artist has a subject that they gravitate towards, and for me it's landscape every time. I dabble in others, but I always come landscape. It is my first love, I suppose, when it comes to painting. So I would have been painting and doing studio landscapes really up until about, God, it must be 7-8 years ago, something like that. And I just needed a challenge. It all got a bit safe, and I wouldn't say easy, but the process was very safe. So I'd have a subject, maybe take photos, take some sketches, go into the studio, recreate them, and I think I needed a bit of a kick to get out of my comfort zone. So I thought, I heard about Plein Air, and I think the festival was on. I think some people I knew were going to the festival in Wexford, Art in the Open. I thought I'd give it a go. It was challenging that first year, but I did fall in love with doing Plein Air painting because it's something else. It's just that entire experience. If you like painting landscape, the difference between painting outside and painting in the studio is there's no comparison whatsoever. When you're outside, you've got the entire landscape. You're standing there, it's huge, it's all around you, you can move around it, you got the sounds, you got the smells, everything. And then, when we take a photograph, and I do use photographs in my studio work. I'm not a purist in that sense, but when you go into the studio, you end up with something very reduced from that big experience, So it can work. You just have to bring more to the studio, I think, very often. So I'll do color notes. I'll always visit a site if I'm doing a landscape painting, make some notes, color notes, little sketches, things like that, to try and get that, I suppose, that bigger experience into your painting. But yeah, I fell in love with plein air painting. I love it. I love being outside. I love being outdoors. I love walking. I love wandering around. I love places. So it was really just a mashing together of all my my likes. And yeah, it's my happy place when I got a day off and go off and do a bit of painting. Spend 6-7 hours outside just wandering around painting. I absolutely love it. Yeah, yeah, it's great.
And do you find that you're, you know, you over those 7 years since you were introduced to plein air, that you've kind of gathered a ready-made kit now that you can just get up and go, or is there, you know, is there different equipment that you need to go plein air painting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's like anything. If your equipment is easy to get at, easy to use, you'll get out and you'll paint. If you have to spend half an hour looking for stuff and then you go out and you've forgotten half the stuff, that's a disaster. So yeah, anybody who's come to my classes knows I'm pretty disciplined with and minimalist as well with equipment. So I use I always go with a Alla Prima push out box. Which is made by a guy called Ben Haggett in the States. They're absolutely beautiful. I don't have one with me. It's in the other studio, I'm afraid. But it's just this beautiful handmade piece of kit. And there's something about the fact that another pair of hands has made this piece of equipment that really makes me, I think, slow down a little bit and respect the painting process. It does mean a lot to me that it's a handmade box. So yeah, it's a real small little box. Sometimes I'll go out with just 3 colors, 3 primaries and a white, and 1 brush, a little bit of medium, and I paint a lot on small panels.
Okay.
I absolutely love doing these small, they're called pochades, which is a French word for oil sketch. So yeah, equipment is important. Now, if you go a bit bigger, I've done some larger pieces. You're really down to a field easel then, or a French easel, which is a much more cumbersome piece of kit. So yeah, traveling light is good. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
And what are the key differences then that you find? So working plein air, obviously you have everything going on around you. You're not just focused on a reference photo.
Yeah.
But are there, how do you manage the fact that there's not a freeze frame of what you're about to paint?
Yeah.
How do you decide what stays in the finished painting and what you move as the landscape around you is moving?
Well, I think it's over the last 7 or 8 years, I've developed my I've sort of got to grips with the process. So now I do feel, I think, comfortable enough with getting a painting done that's out there. Up until maybe the first sort of 3 or 4 years, as you say, you can't freeze a frame, and you're constantly trying to do that. So you're trying to control the landscape, you know, oh, the sun's gone, oh, I'm going to go home, or, you know, taking a photo and working from that. But it just gradually, and that came from doing these small pieces, doing maybe one a day for a couple of years. You just get a really good, you develop a good visual memory. And also you stop trying to sort of be too fixated on what you see out there. So it's kind of like you take a little glimpse of something, and then you've got this whole sort of set of processes that you can call on. So I've got a palette of colors that I know works for a dull overcast day. I've got something else that I know works for dusk or for dawn or for strong sunlight. So I've kind of worked out a little bit of a process, and then I can bring that to the painting. So I don't have to, there's a lot of sort of inside head knowledge that you bring to an experience. So even at dusk now, if I'm out painting at dusk, I could, you know, it might be 20 minutes for a painting. And you just learn to simplify it down, write down to simplify it. And this is something I teach in all my classes as well, simplifying masses. So taking all that information And in a landscape, you know, when you're standing there in person, there is just masses of information. So trying to take that and sort of categorize it and analyze it and pull out things that are important and forget about things that aren't, group things together. So very, very quickly you can get down to something quite structured. And then you can build up from that. So if you're starting with something simple, it gives you scope, I think, to be creative in your response rather than trying to control all that massive information. I don't know if that makes sense, but actually, if I just show you a couple of little pieces, I was out
Great.
in Bray. It's a little one, little nocturne of Bray.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So,
and what you said, you have some colors that you do. So in a sketch like, well, it's not fair to call it a sketch. In a painting like that, what colors would be your four?
Actually, I'll tell you now the colours. And actually, we come back to that point that you said it's not fair to call it a sketch. So I'll come back to that because I've got it's quite an interesting thing to tease out. So yes, I would have a palette of colours for that. So I'd have a couple of blues that I use. I love my turquoise, cobalt turquoise, so I use that quite a lot. Use an ultramarine, and then it's just a matter of sort of working with tones. So it's quite a limited palette. There might only be 3 colours in it. But it's you have to work especially quickly at dusk, you know, and sunsets and things like that, because you might have consistent light in the day for maybe 2 hours, and then when it gets to sunset, that whole process speeds right up. So your sun is sinking, getting more and more interesting, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's gone, you know, over the horizon. So you need a process. You know, how do I paint the sunset? Right. Well, I've got a you know, a set piece of how sunsets work, or a bit of theory, and then I can look at what's actually happening out there, put the 2 pieces of information together, and that enables me to work quite quickly. Yeah, you're saying about the difference between an oil sketch. So I love doing these small pieces because I think they have a sort of a vibrancy and an immediacy that I find is often lost in a larger work. I love doing big pieces as well, but there's something special about those tiny little paintings that I just find, I just love doing them, and I love those sorts of sketches from other people as well. So even though they're sketches, I don't think of them as any less than a large studio piece. In my mind, they're exactly the same thing. It's just this, you know, studio piece could take 20, 30, 40 times longer than a small oil sketch. There's actually an artist that I follow, a friend of mine, Jamie Dunn, put me onto him a couple of years ago, called Jeremy Mann, and he does some he's in San Francisco, he does some colossal big cityscape paintings, but he also does these tiny little plein air sketches, and they're half the size of mine. They're literally only 4 inches by 5 inches, but what he gets into that, I'm actually in awe of what he does. So I find it sometimes a bit depressing looking at his work, because he's where I think I'd like to be. And just the fact that in a very short space of time, you know, 10 minutes, he puts all his experience of painting, everything he's ever learned, condenses it down to something very, very quick. I suppose you can make a comparison with maybe an athlete. So they're doing the 100-meter sprint, but you couldn't say that the 100 meters is any more, you know, valid than the marathon. It's just all that information, all that experience has been condensed into, you know, a performance, into something really quick. And that's how I think of these oil sketches. It took a long time to get to that stage, to be able to get something out. But yeah, so I like doing both, but there's a special place in my heart for the oil sketch. Absolutely.
I got to see them up close at the United Arts Club, your exhibition there. And I see what you mean in terms of the vibrancy that they hold, and in such a small surface, you know, you're sort of transported to that space. It's really amazing what you do. What I hear a lot is about practice, and that people have to continue to work kind of consistently in order to get as good as they want to be. It's not about somebody being a born artist and they can create something magnificent overnight.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's that frustration in the sort of in that process. But from what you're saying, you know, you're constantly learning and constantly practicing and working.
Well, I think like a lot of artists, I find myself compelled to paint, so I can't not paint. You can ask my wife what I'm like when I don't paint. I'm a nightmare to live with. I have to do it, and I think that's common to a lot of artists. So that's sort of it's fortunate in a way that I don't have to force myself to practice, because it does. It does need daily work. It really does. You know, there's a couple of great phrases about that. One is inspiration is something you see in the rearview mirror. So you know, you can't sit around waiting for inspiration or your muse to turn up. You just, I think most artists would agree. You just get out and do it, and then you look back and you realize, oh yeah, that was a really kind of creative time. But you have to work towards those times. Absolutely. So I mean, the other thing about doing plein air sketches is you go out and you might have a bad day, and they could be, you could do some truly horrendous paintings. It could be all your fault, or it could just be partly your fault. Sometimes the light isn't conducive to the subject you're trying to paint, and sometimes you have an off day. So it can be quite demoralizing when that happens. But you know, if you just have this practice, this constant practice of actually going and doing it, or this discipline, I suppose, of just doing it, whatever. And then you look back in hindsight and you see, you know, maybe half or 2/3 of them worked okay. But yeah, very much so. It does take regular practice, absolutely. And I think that's true of anyone who's sort of learning to paint as well. There's very few people, I think, that can't learn the mechanics of painting. Very few, if any. But it does take discipline. You know,
I think we're born. I think we're born creative. I know. I have two small kids, and like, give them something to create, and they're, you know, they're just very free doing it. So I think then it's maybe, you know, you're taking down different paths. But I do think, you know, to your point, I think everybody should be able to pull out a creative thread. Have you always been an artist?
I was going to say I was always good at it. I think it was the only thing I was ever good at, actually. As a child, in school, it was probably the only thing I was really good at. So I suppose I enjoyed it as well. I wasn't really committed to it. So I had periods where I have a sort of flurry of work and interest in art, and then I'd leave it for a couple of years. I did have two excellent art teachers in school, which I have to credit. My secondary school art teacher, she I think really gave me the confidence, I think, to carry on with it, you know. But yeah, I suppose I was about 30 then when I went back to it seriously. I just found myself working in graphic design. I didn't dislike the work, but I think if you're a creative person and you're not being creative, it can really get you down eventually. I think you have to be creative, you have to get it out. So around about 30, I just found that I was working in a direction I just didn't really feel that fulfilled. So I just, I decided to really give the art a go. And it was tough, I think, for about 10 years, really tough.
And did you pack in the sort of the day job, for want of a better, at that, like, did you throw caution to the wind completely?
Did, yeah. And I was doing both for about 5 years, and then it was actually when my son had been born and my daughter was on the way. So it would be about 16 years ago now, 17. And my wonderful wife, I asked her, I said, do you mind if I give this a go? She said, yeah, come on, go for it. And I couldn't have done it apart from that. So she was working at a steady job, a good job. And so I went out and had a go at it. Yeah, so I went out in 2000 2006, I think, and by 2007, the global economy had collapsed. So you could say I went in a bad time, but I think it was actually a good time because the the benchmark was quite low of what you'd consider to be commercial success at that time. So yeah, it sort of gradually built up. The last 10 years have been particularly interesting because opportunities have started coming to me, whereas the first 10 years I was constantly looking for them for
Sure.
opportunities. So they started to turn around a little bit, and yeah, it's a really exciting time right now.
Brilliant.
Lots of fun things happening.
That's great. You work primarily with two mediums, so pastels and oils. And
Yeah.
I have gotten myself into trouble a few times, as have a few people in the studios,
Okay.
where we think we're looking at an oil, and until we look closely, we realize it's pastels, or vice versa.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what's your relationship with those two mediums? What do you get from both of them?
Okay.
What drew you to them?
I think that's an interesting point that's just come up there, that when you look at things in reproduction, very often we don't see the sort of the difference, the nuances in them. And it's very true what you've just said there about looking at paintings on screens, and you can't really tell the size of them, the scale of them. So you can be looking at a painting that's this big, or one that's gigantic, and it's hard to tell. And the other thing is, we don't really, when you're looking at things on screens, you can't really engage with the physical qualities, the physical properties of the medium. Because to me, I think in my mind, they're quite different things, pastel and oil. So I started working in pastel about 12 years ago, I think. I also do some work in charcoal, and recently went back to watercolor. So I actually did some printmaking before that as well. So I really enjoy trying out lots of different media. So to me, pastel, what I love about pastel is the quality of the material itself. So not every subject will work as a pastel. It might be something that works as an oil. So it's good to have sort of a few media that you're comfortable with. So then when I come to a certain painting or a certain image and I want to get it, I'm like, will this work in pastel? Will this work in oil? Well, certainly I can't make things work on that scale in pastel. It just doesn't work for me.
Okay.
So pastel is usually around sort of 50 by 60 centimeters. It's the color you get out of pastel is absolutely incredible. So it's the most vibrant. It's the most vibrant medium you can get, bar none, more so than acrylics even, because it's basically just pure pigment held together with the tiniest amount of binder, just so it doesn't become dust. And in fact, some of them do. The pastel's so soft you crush them and you just end up with a handful of so it's really painting with pigment itself, and it's just a wonderfully tactile material. You can push it around, you can create beautiful hatch marks with it. What I love in particular about pastel is that every mark you make stays visible, whereas with paint you put a blue down, put a red on top of it, the two will mix together to some degree and make a purple. So it's like fluid, so it joins together, whereas pastel, everything will be visible, so you can put in 10, 20 different shades, tones, and to some degree they're all still present. So yeah, I really enjoy working with it. The last pastel I did was last week. I've actually been struggling a bit with pastel the last couple of months, just trying to get back into it, and every time I'm starting pastel, I'm sort of realizing, oh no, this is an oil painting, this isn't a pastel. So there's certain subjects that work, and techniques that work. So I did one last week I was really, really happy with. I've been to the circus over Christmas a few times, doing
I've
some
seen these. They're fab. Yeah.
some studio work. So there was one then last week that I was tackling, and it was perfect for pastel. So that there was bright, intense lights, and I think there was a dress. There was a girl with a dress on, and it was just. There's a reason why Degas did those ballet dances in pastel. They work. They really work. The dresses and the lights, the contrast. So it all works really well. I find pastel for me doesn't work well in sort of the more muted tonal subjects. That for me, that subtlety is really to do with oil paint, you know. Okay.
I like it. What makes you decide then which is going to be pastel and what's going to be oils? Or is does it have to be, is it mainly about color, or is it?
It'd be color and marks as well, so mark making. So I've yeah, I suppose you know, some people might think of me as a traditional painter, but I don't. I think of myself as, if there was anything, I think I'd respond more closely to sort of modernism than anything else. So you know, the I suppose the one of the core ideas behind modernism is this thing, fancy name called medium specificity, right? And it just means that you let the medium speak for itself.
Okay.
So to me, if I'm doing an oil painting, oil paint loves to sort of blend into itself. It loves to create soft gradients. It also loves to do thick impasto as the paste. But pastel likes to do something else. Pastel likes to make sort of hard marks, lines, texture. It picks up the texture of the paper. You get this beautiful mottled effect. Not so much blending. I find that sort of kills the medium a little bit. So I suppose in both, I'm trying to sort of celebrate the medium, which is something that gets lost very often in reproduction, in book reproductions, and in you know, online, especially when you're looking at things on Facebook. That all gets lost because we can't really engage so well with the surface of what's happening. So to me, there's two things in a painting. There's the image and the concept and all that, and then there's the medium itself, and it's sort of getting those two to work together, you know, to really come together. I just came from I just went to see the Turner show, the Sun Is God there, National Gallery of Ireland. I went to see it 3 times, but every time I went back, I was just amazed how Turner was so ahead of his time. So he was really interested and engaged in that idea of letting the medium do the work in a way. So you look at how he handles paint, thin paint, thick paint, there's some gouache, there's pastel in there, there's all sorts of things. But each time he seems to understand the sort of core qualities of the material and really try and celebrate them.
Nice.
And that's something, yeah, that's something that I think for me, that's what I try and respond to when I'm working with pastel or oil paint. So I don't try and sort of get pastels and try and make them do what oil paint does. There's some subjects to me that are just so much work. It's like, well, no, that's an oil painting, or that's a watercolor. So I'd rather put my energy into, you know, holding my skills in that medium rather than trying to force a medium into something it doesn't want to do. You know,
That's great.
it's a bit like raising children, you know.
Yeah,
you can't force them to do what they want to do. You don't want to do, you know. Yeah.
Sometimes they just have to go to bed, though.
It's true.
And what's that piece behind you there?
Oh yes, we have some pieces. Yes, so this is a couple of studio pieces. I don't know if it comes out very well, but let me just pull that forward a little bit. So I showed you some of the plein air paintings. So this is just a couple of studio pieces. So this one actually is going to the show in the doorway. It's of a piece I did in the studio of out on Achill. I went to Achill last year. So Pertine Harbour, this is huge harbour at the edge of Achill. And I just love working out in the west there and trying to get some sense of that wild landscape. So I like going off in the winter there, not so much in summer. Okay. But, you know, this was done in the studio. I don't think it's something I could have done plein air. I can work large, but it's quite difficult. But the lighting in it is all sort of a studio construct. It wasn't there at all. So the lighting I've kind of made up. So that's what I enjoy doing in the studio, of getting the subject, spending a bit more time thinking and analysing, what do I want to say, how do I want to say it, how am I going to construct this, what do I need to change, manipulate. So it's a lot more considered. Okay. Yeah, and then there's one more there of Venice. So again, I did a lot of plein air work in Venice, and then this was a studio piece I did when I came home. So just, yeah, I spend a bit of time trying to get those more sort of subtle aspects of light um, into the painting. Yeah.
Stunning.
So it's two different things to me, plein air painting and studio painting, and I love doing both. But there isn't often that much of a crossover. People often say to me, "Oh, do you do your sketch outside and then bring it back and paint it up big?" I'm like, no, because to me there's a compositional element that just doesn't translate
Sure.
really. Something's, certain subject works on a small scale. To me, it's a often different subject on a larger scale. But I will do studies. I will do plein air studies specifically for a larger piece. But I'll rarely sort of do a small piece and then think, oh, that will make a good big painting. I think only once I've ever done that. Just once,
And then was it that good that you said I'm going to leave it there, or was it not an experience you wanted to do again?
No, it was great. It just so happened that I was sort of tackling. It was actually a painting of the Cliffs of Moher, not the Cliffs of Moher, the cliffs on the Aran Islands by Dunangus. There's a big pool. There's a natural sort of square pool down there. The wormhole or something called it. It's where they do the Red Bull.
Serpent's Lair, no.
Sorry.
Serpent's Lair, no.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
I know
Yeah,
it.
Serpent's Lair. So I was down there painting, which was just wild.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd sort of tackled that gigantic landscape as a small piece, which sort of worked. But then I thought, it could that one in particular could work as a giant painting as well. So yeah, I sort of went from 6-inch by 8-inch painting to I think 1.5 meter painting. So that was kind of fun, but it often doesn't work that way for me.
Yeah.
Certain amount of information that's just lost in there.
Well, I can see in that instance why that landscape, inspired a bigger surface area.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. Yeah.
Well, you're great at what you do, Dave. We're delighted that you come up from Skerries every week to teach in the Schoolhouse. We really appreciate it. And I know you have 2 workshops coming up with us as well.
Yeah.
One in March in landscapes and oils. So that's timely for this conversation. And then I know there's only a couple of spaces left in that one. And then in March, you're doing your pastels, in April.
In April,
there's a pastels workshop.
Pastel workshop with you, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to hear more about how you do what you do, there's 2 options for you. I hope that wasn't too bad now of a chat, Dave.
Lovely.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was great. It was good.
Yeah. Thank you. We'd lots of people joining in, and I know people will be watching it back. So thank you so much for your time. You're a legend. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Lana. Take care.
You're great.
See you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.